Hello, everyone. Welcome to Conversations with Sekani, a podcast for people in their 20s who are trying to figure out life and not get lost along the way. Today's guest is Dr. Cynthia Coy, founder and CEO of Uncaged Solutions, a leadership development and executive coaching firm helping high achieving women move from overwhelm to overflow. A retired U.S. Air Force officer, certified John Maxwell coach, and leadership strategist. She equips executives with the mindset, communication, and emotional intelligence needed to lead with clarity, confidence, and purpose. Dr. Cynthia, welcome to Conversations with Sekani. It's a pleasure to have you on.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
All right. Wow. Okay. So, Cynthia, I want you to, take us back to your 20s, right? So, what, right? So, what season of life were you in then, and what dreams or ambitions were driving you at that time?
Well, I'll go back just a little bit further because I went to college on an Air Force ROTC scholarship. So what that meant was when I was 21, when I graduated, I already joined the Air Force. So that was where I started. And I will say that that was not my original plan, but um I'm very grateful for the opportunity and the experience. Leadership is something that I've always, I guess, been doing since I was a kid. But I think being 21 and starting off, and I remember day one, it was like, here goes 56 people that you're responsible for, and I had no idea what the heck I was doing. Um, but I learned a lot from the people who I was entrusted to lead. And I think that was a big part of leadership. And so at that time, I just knew, I was just going to do my 4 years that I thought at the time in the military. Ended up doing 20, right? But I was going
Mm,
to do that. And then my goal at the time was to become a CPA. And so I was just going to get out and become a certified public accountant, right? But
mm,
as I continued in my leadership journey, one of the things I started seeing in my career was, there's good leaders, not so good leaders. And then I started developing a passion for leadership, leadership development in particular. And so that became my goal at that point was to become an entrepreneur, to be able to help other leaders be better. So that was my early 20s. Obviously, I did, like I said, a 20-year career in the Air Force. So was able to pivot midway through my career to really start focusing on doing that.
wow. Oh, all right. Okay, all right. Thank you, Cynthia. I want to believe that you faced some form of like challenges during those years,
Yeah.
especially when you were like a teacher, right? Or okay, when what was I would like to say ask rather, what was one of your greatest teachers from those challenges or mistakes that you made during those years?
Mm. Um, well, I would say that my dad, he was in the Air Force when I
Mm,
grew up. I grew up, as we call it, like an Air Force brat, a military brat, where your parent, one of your parents are in the military, and you're moving around all the time. And so I valued the experience that my dad had. So he was definitely a mentor. And whenever I had issues, I would talk to him about that, and he would give me some wise counsel. But I will say that one of the best teachers is always experience, right? because even though my father had, his career that he'd spent 26 years in the Air Force,
Mm,
um, the things that I was going through, he didn't necessarily go through because one, he was enlisted, I was an officer, so it's a little different. Um, but the experience that I gained, I think, was always the best teacher. And I think one of the things my dad had taught me early on was to listen to my team that I was leading. Um, and so as I went through and we had challenges, um, whether it was because I was a comptroller, like a budget officer, I dealt with money in the military.
mm,
Um, so whether it was organizational issues or personnel issues, because people are people are what makes the organization run, right? So, but sometimes there's challenges there. Um, and it's how do you deal with it? The decision making piece really stretches you because you have so many things to consider. The pros and cons, the um, intended and unintended consequences of your decisions, and they are always teaching opportunities, I believe, to help you grow better as a leader.
mm. Wow. Oh, all right. So thank you for sharing that wonderful story with us, right? You
Yeah.
also mentioned that you serve in the US Air Force and
Yes.
later you became a leadership expert. So looking back, right, what lessons did your 20s teach you, or what lessons did your time there teach you
Mm.
about discipline, resilience, and responsibility?
Yeah. So in the Air Force, the United States Air Force, we have three core values.
Mm,
Number one is integrity first. Number two
mm,
is service before self. And number three is excellence in all we do. So
mm,
those drive everything, especially when it comes to discipline. And you think about being on time to work, right? That's
mhm,
that's one of those things, that I think about being excellent. I think about the the mission itself. It's the service before self. And even leading people, it's I put my people before myself, right? Making sure they were okay, because if they weren't okay, I wasn't going to be okay. Um, and then integrity first, of course, is just making sure that you're doing the right thing all the time, right? Even when people aren't looking. And I think when you look at all of those together, um, there's obviously expectations too, with your performance in any role, and so that drove the discipline for me, because at the end of the day, you have to be on time, you have to perform well, because it's not about you. There's other people that are depending on you. So yeah, I mean the discipline was also, I would say, already formed in me because, like I said, my dad was in the Air Force. So, even as a kid, I mean, getting up when the sun was up, came up sometimes before the sun came up, and doing things like making your bed before as soon as you get up. That was a big thing in my family. Like, you do not get up and just leave your bed undone. And so that discipline that I had in my household was something that I carried on in my, 20s, and I still do to my day to this day, right? Making that bed is still the first thing I do when I wake up. I don't, you know, it's just a habit, and I think that's the thing is like the disciplines that you have or that you develop helps you maintain, create and maintain good habits that become non-negotiables for you as you're moving on. I think part of discipline is knowing why you're doing it, right? And um, your why, I'll just take the example of making your bed, right? We all know that when you make your bed, it actually makes your room look cleaner, even though other stuff can be in disarray. But the bed is the biggest thing in your room. So if you make that up, it makes it look a little bit cleaner, right? I think that's one of those things like just it's just a habit. If you are like me and you like a clean room, I'm a minimalist in my life, so I don't like clutter at all. So that's a big thing that I do. So I think the discipline is just one of those things that, again, I was instilled with as a kid, and it just continued. So there wasn't like a major adjustment for me going into the military. It's just that you have so many other people to answer to and so many other expectations to fulfill.
All right. Wow. Thank you for sharing that wonderful one with us, Cynthia. And like you said, the three core values were integrity first,
Hmm.
service before self, and
Hmm.
excellence in all you do. Wow.
Yes.
Cool. All right. So yes, I
Yeah.
want us to dive into what you're doing now, right? Um,
Hmm.
yeah, your work focuses on helping high achieving women move from overwhelm to overflow. So, what does that transformation actually look like?
That is my life laboratory, my living laboratory right now. All right. What that looks like is like I was talking about how there's all these different expectations, like say from my military career, but there's a lot of expectations we have in life, especially as women. And this is something I'm very passionate about, very like I said, I've lived it. At one point, I was a wife, I was a bonus mom, I was a caregiver, I was obviously a daughter, I was a sister, I was a leader at work, I was leading in my community, I was doing a lot. That's what I was doing. And at the time, it was like I was like, oh, I didn't know how to say no. And some things feel, especially when it comes to your family, some things feel like I don't have a choice. I just have to do this. And what happened to me was I was trying to live up to all these expectations. I was trying to do all these things for all these different people. That in the process, I lost myself. I lost who I was. I distinctly remember waking up one morning, looking in the mirror and asking the question, who are you? Because I didn't recognize myself. I was so stretched so thin that that's where the overwhelm came from. And so I really had to do the work on myself to move from this overwhelm into what I call overflow, which is learning one, how to take a step back and realize how fragmented I was. Um, and that I needed to be whole in order to be the best person for me. Um, so that's that was probably my first step in doing that. Um, and then I would say that and I read about this in my book, Overflow, the New Way to Lead, Live, and Last. There's a process in becoming whole, but I would definitely say that um, the expectations, a lot of times we feel like we have to meet them. But I think I think you would agree with me, Joy, that you find that a lot of things in business and in life are negotiables. There are non-negotiables, but you don't have to say yes to everything. You have to learn how to create and enforce boundaries in your life, because otherwise you start to live and to lead from depletion, and that's not a good place to live, because it's not sustainable. You can only do so much for so long, but our bodies are not created to um, sustain that long term. That's how we wear out. That's how we burn out. That's how we, have the overwhelm, and and it's just so many other effects from that, right? Like our health becomes impacted because you're overwhelmed, you're stressed out, and next thing you know, it starts manifesting itself physically. Ulcers, migraines, all the things that, a lot of us go through. We don't really think they're connected, but they're always connected. That's the biggest thing I think I've learned in this process is everything is connected.
Hmm. Right. Wow. And in that frame or in that process, you created the fresh framework, right? Which is
Hmm.
financial, relational, emotional, spiritual, and holistic well-being. So what
Yeah.
inspired this approach and why are all these five areas important?
So remember I was saying that, I realized I was so fragmented and, here's the thing, we are multifaceted people, right? We function um and do so many things. And one of the things I realize is like our life is not just go to work or, have your business and there's home. It's all these different aspects. So when I started thinking about the different areas of overwhelm, and this was just not for me, but talking with several women who started to express their overwhelm. This is how the areas came up, and I love acronyms, things that are easy to remember. But if I found that these were the major areas, so the F is for financial, and this is where, and by the way, all of them are tied to stewardship, right? How you steward your life. But the finances can be a stress, not just because you might be in debt, even if you're not in debt, financially, it can still be stressful. And a lot of times it's just our habits, our relationship with money, right? Um, and for some, it's more stressful than others, but that was one of those areas. And then there was the relational piece. And that's where relational intelligence comes in. I think knowing how to really navigate relationships, not just relationships with other people, but how do you allow people to navigate relationships with you? You know? Um, like it's one of those things, again, I think this is where you get into boundaries, because in the relational intelligence, it's really important to be able to communicate to people around you, um, who you are, how you expect to be treated, what you will allow, all of those things. And I think one of the biggest things, and I write about this in the book, is really taking some inventory of your relationships. And that was one of the biggest things I did. I said, hey, because we use the term friend like very loosely sometimes. Everybody's not your friend, right? And I think number one, it's defining to you what is a friend, right? And
Mm,
based on that definition that you give, then it's like, where are these people? Where do they fall into? So, an exercise that I did really quick, I'll share is I started going through my phone and I drew three circles. And I had my inner circle, which is like my innermost circle, which is the people who I trust the most. These are the people that I share my you know deepest desires, fears with. And then I have my middle circle. Those are people who, I consider them good people to have in my life. But I don't let them as closely in as my inner circle. And then there's the outer circle, and these are people who I may work with, have worked with in the past, people who I might go to church with or whatnot, but we just have more of a associative relationship. And I started putting names in the circles, and then I started realizing everybody that I used to call a friend, they're not really my friend, as I define friendship. But they are good people to know, maybe good people to have. But the circle that is most closest to me is very small, and I intentionally keep it very small. So that was that. And then on the emotional side, I think this ties across all areas, and this is your emotional mastery. I think a lot of times, whether it's your finances, whether it's your relationships, if you don't know how to master your emotions, that will drive a wedge in relationships. It will make you make bad decisions at work sometimes because you're letting your emotions rule you instead of you ruling your emotions. And so being able to, one, understand this is how I'm responding in certain situations and why am I responding this way, and being able to employ some tools, like maybe taking a 7-second pause, deep breathing, in order so you can actually be more emotionally astute in managing relationships and other aspects of your life. And then we have the spiritual piece, which this is where I would say your grounding is at. Um, Regardless of what your spiritual beliefs are, I would say in my research and in my conversations with women, that seems to be the guiding light, the driver in how they make decisions. Because our spirituality, I believe, it it's already tied to the values that we have for our life. So, like I was talking about with the core values for the Air Force, when I made a decision, it was like, okay, is this integrity? Is this service? Is this excellence? When you look at our spiritual lives, it's the same too, right? So those things that, if you're a follower of Jesus, as I am, there are certain, there's the Ten Commandments, there's the Beatitudes in the New Testament. There's certain things that I allow to drive my decision making, because my goal in my spiritual walk is to be like Jesus. So therefore, I I approach everything with the spirit of love, right? I don't come out, with I'm not a hater. And I try to have compassion, with people. Work in progress all the time, right? But that's that. And then the H is for holistic, and that's really the integrator. There's obviously more facets of our lives, right? There's your physical fitness and your mental fitness. But the acronym would have been way too long. So the H is how we integrate not just the financial, relational, emotional, and spiritual part, but the other aspects that you value. Whether it is your physical health, whether it's your mental health, whether it's recreational experiences, or intellectual stimulation, whatever it is, it's how do we integrate all of that so I can live a life that is not stressful, that is not overwhelming, but it is operating from a point where I am full myself. I am getting everything that I need to have a sustainable life, have sustainable leadership, and being able to not be stressed out, but be able to operate from a point of overflow so I can continue to pour into people around me without getting depleted myself.
Mm. Wow. Oh, all right. I'd like to ask, right? Because amongst this framework that you mentioned so far, I
Hmm.
believe you've worked with clients, right? So which of these framework do you think most women actually lack from, the financial, relational, emotional, spiritual, and holistic? Which one do you see that is more common that people lack and they should, start working towards?
That's so hard because everybody comes with different ones, I would say.
Mhm.
And I actually developed a tool that will be coming out soon to kind of basically like um, I'm going to be doing some group coaching, and that's one of the assessments that people will be able to take is figuring out what is causing me most overwhelm, right? So I would say that answer will vary, but I will say in a lot of conversations that I've had, um, I will say that it seems to be a tie between financial and emotional. Um, and that could be for different reasons again. So I think the assessment tool will be interesting to see actual data from different women, but just in conversations, I think one of the things is not being able to deal with the stress that comes from all the expectations that you're given from other people um, is something that definitely affects emotions. So I would say that's probably one of the biggest one.
Hmm. Wow. All right. Okay. So thanks for sharing that wonderful one with us, right? And
Hmm.
I'd like us to talk on communication before, I ask my final question.
Sure.
Communication is one of the biggest challenges for many professionals, right? So what are some
Hmm.
common mistakes that leaders make, and how can they become more authentic communicators, rather? Yeah.
Yes, I would say in about 95% of the conflicts I've been able to help facilitate resolution to, or conflicts I've experienced in my life, communication has been at the root. The number one thing, and I definitely do this as a coach. It's one of the things you do as a coach is you have to listen. And I'm not just saying listen to the words that are coming out of your mouth, Joy. I'm saying listen to what you're not saying as well. Um, a lot of times, especially when people challenge your view, they have a different perspective. And I think that's important to recognize is that everybody doesn't think the same. I know that sounds like, yeah, we know that, but people don't act like it. So that's why I'm like, why are you getting all upset? You know, when when I might have a different view than you or you have a different view than me, I shouldn't get upset. I should just listen. Listen to the why. I think a lot of times when you're not listening, you don't get to know more about that person. If you listen to people, you start to realize what some of their values are. You start to realize maybe their background. You start to realize why they make certain decisions, why they do certain things. And you start to recognize there's value in that. But if you will never do that if you don't listen and just seek to understand, right? Um, And then from there, being able to, that opens the door to a lot of things. Collaboration. I think listening is the first step that people have to start doing. And that means you have to learn how to be quiet. Um, and I will say this really quick because I know we're probably getting short, but a good exercise to start learning how to listen is to start being quiet with yourself. If you can wake up in the morning or at any time throughout the day, start with 2 minutes, build up to five, maybe 10, and actually don't say anything. Don't have any kind of stimuli. Just be like in a meditative state and just listen to what your spirit has to say to you. Um, that's a first step. That's a good exercise, and you'll learn how to practice that more when you're around people.
Mm. Well, so taking a pause and, listening to your instincts, right?
Hmm.
And then also trying to understand other people's point of view as well, right?
Yes.
Because, like you mentioned, there are people that if what you're saying does not align with what they say, they automatically just disagree, and sometimes it could result to conflict. So
Hmm.
it's better to, sometimes just pause and try to listen to the other person as well and try to understand why they think something is that way rather than, trying to enforce your own belief and, stuff like that. So yeah, thank you, Cynthia, for that amazing one. Right. And
No problem.
right, I want us to take, life lessons from this conversation, right? So for young women in their 20s who dream of becoming leaders, but they struggle with confidence or imposter syndrome, what would you say to encourage them?
I would really ask them to take a moment to, especially if they're struggling with self-belief. We'll take that. To take a moment and ask yourself the question,
Mm,
who told me that story? And then the follow-up question is it true? So a lot of times with self-belief, we have confidence issues. Um, and a lot of that is because we've either been told growing up or even as an adult that that's not a good idea, or nobody's going to pay you for that, or nobody's going to listen to you. And we start to believe that because that's just how our brain works. And being able to reprogram and start to change the narrative, what you're saying to yourself, what you're allowing to yourself to listen to, that's key. Um, and that is the key to being successful in anything. Um, and I'll share the story really quick. When I did my
mm,
first marathon about 7 years ago, and before that time, if you would have told me, yeah, you can run a marathon, I would have been like, no, I can't. No, I can't. Are you crazy? That's like 26.2 miles.
mm,
Um, but then I started training and I started, everything is a bite-sized, step. You don't like just go out and run 26.2, but you just start, 1 mile at a time, one step at a time. And then voila, 6, 7 months later, I ran a marathon. And that's a whole process. That's a whole nother conversation. Joy, so many lessons from that. But I will say, yeah, when you're young in your 20s, it's so important to establish going back to those relationships that you have. Who are you allowing to pour in your life? Who are you listening to? And, following up with yourself, what are you telling yourself? Is it true? Because they're all just stories. They're stories. So making sure that you are listening to the right stories and creating the right stories for yourself is so important.
mm. Wow. Oh, all right. So yeah, thank you, Dr. Cynthia. And yes, it brings me to the final segment of my podcast. I call it the rapid fire segment, right? You could
Okay.
either answer with a word or a phrase starting now. So
Okay.
what is one word that describes your 20s?
Curious.
Wow, curious. Okay, I would have said discipline because you've always been disciplined. All right. So what would you say is one word that describes you now?
Intentional.
All right. So would you say you're a morning person or a night owl?
Morning.
Okay. So what is a book that's influenced your leadership?
The Bible.
Hmm. Okay. So what is one daily habit you never skip?
Making my bed when I get up.
Wow. Okay. And finally, what is one quality every great leader should develop?
Humility.
Amazing. Wow. All right. So, yes, thank you, Cynthia. This has been amazing, honestly. And before you go, where can listeners get to learn more about you and also connect with you?
Yes, you can. You can reach out to me through uncagedsolutions.com. You can also go to my website, drcynthiakoi.com, and order the book that's coming out August 25th. So we just got a couple more weeks here. That's the book Overflow, The New Way to Lead, Live, and Last. And you can find me on LinkedIn under Dr. Cynthia Coy if you want to message me, have a conversation. Totally open to that.
All right. Wow. And definitely, I'm going to put the link in the show notes so it's easily accessible for listeners. And to my listeners, I want to say thanks for tuning into Conversations with Sekani. If this episode sparked something in you, just as it did in me, make sure to share to someone you think might need this and also subscribe so you don't miss out on new episodes. Once again, thank you, Cynthia. To have a wonderful day ahead of you.
Thank you, Joy. Had
All
fun.
right.
Thanks.
Take care. All right.
All right.